Perfect. So I just want to, again, welcome everyone. Thank you for taking your time out of your lunch hour to join us for crowdfunding, how it works, why it works, and how you can make it work for you, with guest speaker Brady Josephson from Chimp and Peer Giving. So before we get started, I do want to take a time to quickly introduce you to TechSoup Canada, just in case you're not familiar with us. So our mission is to help nonprofits use technology more effectively. We do this in two ways. We try to make technology more affordable through our technology donations program. So basically, we partner with corporations like Microsoft, Adobe, and Symantec, and we offer their products at a discount or for as a donation to registered charities, nonprofits, and libraries in Canada. So some of the cost savings that you can expect to see is, for example, if you want Microsoft Office Professional, you can expect to pay about $500 retail, online, or in store. If you have a TechSoup Canada membership and you're qualified for our Microsoft donations program, you can actually pick up a copy of Office Pro for about $47. So as you can imagine, that can become a quite significant cost savings, especially if you're buying Office for your entire staff. So if you're not familiar, please check us out at techsoupcanada.ca. For more information on how to create an account, you can type the / getting started with the underscore. The other thing that we do to help nonprofits understand technology is we create and curate tech resources. We write blogs, we write articles, we curate content on our social media accounts, and we host events and webinars such as this one, all for free to help nonprofits learn more about technology and all the trends that might affect their day-to-day. So if you have a topic in mind, if you want to learn about a topic that we haven't covered, or maybe have covered but you want an update on, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to put that together for you. So TechSoup Canada, we're also part of a global network. Together, we serve over 60 countries worldwide. So if you have a friend or a colleague in your nonprofit network that's outside of Canada, please let them know that there is a TechSoup office nearby that's more than willing to help them with their tech needs. So we ourselves, we're actually a small nonprofit based in Toronto, and we're a program of the Centre for Social Innovation. So if you're ever by Toronto, please feel free to drop by, say hi. We're very friendly. So for today's webinar, we are using GoToWebinar. So if you're not familiar with it, there is a panel on your right-hand side that you can use to toggle your audio options. So you can use a computer, USB mic and speakers, or if you're having trouble with your audio, you can switch to a telephone conference line. If you have trouble, you can just toggle in between and then GoToWebinar will troubleshoot it for you. But if you have any questions, please use the question chat box. I'm actually here with my colleague Nicola, who you will hear from later on. She will be moderating our Q&A portion. If you have a question for Brady or even for ourselves, please type it in and we will be more than happy to take it from there. Just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded. We will upload it and have this available on our website. The presentation slides will be available as well, and we will also have recap notes. Last thing is, after the webinar, when you leave the session, we will have a two-question webinar that will, two-question survey that will launch after this session. We ask if you can just please fill it out. It will help us understand how to best serve you. If you have any follow-up questions, you can also use that as an opportunity to reach out to us. So it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Brady Josephson. He has over 7 years of experience crafting strategies, campaigns, and processes for nonprofits. He's actually currently responsible for business development and charity relations at Chimp and Peer Giving. He's also an adjunct professor at North Park University's School of Business and Nonprofit Management. And on the side, he writes for really notable organizations such as Huffington Post. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with them. HubSpot, and he also manages his own blog at recharity.ca. So without further ado, I'm actually going to pass presentation over to Brady.
Great, thank you. And thanks everyone for taking some time. Maybe you're eating some lunch out east, or maybe you're just kind of getting your first or second cup of coffee out west. Or if you're like me, you're on your fourth cup of coffee out west. So thanks everyone for coming. Crowdfunding, how it works, why it works, and how you can make it work. As Joyce mentioned, I'm a bit of a charity nerd. I teach, I write. I'm in it all the time. I love it. And one of the things that's interesting to me is to see how crowdfunding and this whole kind of new movement is really just, in some ways, good old-fashioned fundraising. So that's what we'll kind of talk about today, and then specifically kind of how you can get started in crowdfunding yourself. So as you mentioned, I work for a couple companies, Peer Giving and Chimp, and we have another law firm company called Benefit Group, and together our overall ambition is to empower the human spirit of charity. Happy to talk more about our companies as we like, but let's get down to business. So housekeeping on my end. One of the things I kind of ask on webinars is just to write down 3 things. So if you have a pad of paper or you got your phone or your iPad and Evernote, whatever it might be, as we go throughout the webinar, I just want you to walk away with 3 things that I hope are kind of actionable and useful. They may not relate directly to crowdfunding. It might be something like, oh man, we really need to, thank our donors, or it could be something that's purely task related, professionally or non. Like, I got to pick up milk this afternoon, whatever it might be. But the beauty of kind of learning in webinars is kind of what ideas spark other ideas, which spark other ideas. And so the more that you write it down, 1, you'll be more focused. You won't be trying to remember this task. But then 2, you don't know what idea will lead to the idea, which leads to the idea. And so kind of be diligent. Try to write 3 things down, and hopefully I can get you 3 good things to apply to your work. And then just a couple caveats and biases. My background is very much in the international development world. I was the startup development director for an organization out of Chicago working in Zambia, and then I worked on the marketing and fundraising side for a microfinance organization. And so a lot of my stories and personal experience come from that world. And so that's what I'm talking more about. It's because it's what I know. But the principles apply whether you're in higher ed or social service, whatever they might be. But just that's a bit of kind of my background. My email's there. That's my Twitter account. And then those are some websites. I love getting personal emails from questions, and I respond to all of them. So, as you go, feel free to write that down and send me an email as well. So first, a little story here. What we're looking at is Benjamin Franklin. He's on the $100 bill. And as legend has it, Benjamin Franklin was kind of one of the first. He's a founding father, but he was also a philanthropist, an inventor. He did all kinds of stuff. But he was also a fundraiser. And one of the methods, as legend has it, is that when he would go out to recruit people or raise funds, he'd put people into 3 groups. The first group was people that he knew would give him money, would support his project and support him. The next group were people that he was pretty sure that they would get behind it and support what he was doing. And then the third group was kind of, they probably won't get involved. So he'd separate them into 3 groups, and then what he'd do is he'd go to the first group, and he'd ask them, he'd tell them about his project, see if they can get them involved and have them support. After that's done, he'd go to the second group, and he'd say, man, I talked to all these people already, they're behind it, do you want to join the cause and what's going on? And then they would, get involved and give. And then he'd go to that third group that he wouldn't think would give, but now he's already had 2 pockets of people show energy, show momentum, show support financially for this project. And that was the best case for him to win over that group that probably wouldn't give in the first place. So why I'm telling that story is this is actually a fundamental strategy for crowdfunding in terms of starting with core supporters first, building momentum before you go out to the next people, and then to the third level of maybe the unknowns, and that's where we get into things like donor acquisition. So this new school form of fundraising is really just like the oldest form of fundraising that exists, where it was just about passionate people going to their networks to raise capital in support of something they believe in. And even when we look at this definition of crowdfunding, so this comes from Oxford Dictionaries, kind of corrects me up, the practice of funding a project or venture by raising many small amounts of money from a large number of people, typically via the internet. And when you read this, maybe with the exception of typically via the internet, that's just fundraising. This isn't anything new to us. But the internet piece does shift things a bit, and I'll talk a little bit about why crowdfunding is a little bit different. And then also for the purposes of this conversation, I'm not making any distinction between crowdfunding versus social fundraising versus peer-to-peer. I'm happy to talk about some nuances in the questionnaire phase, but as we're talking about the session, just think about it as this kind of basic, broad, grassroots-focused definition of crowdfunding. Okay, so kind of how it works. I think we're all familiar, so I won't go into like this is a fundraising page necessarily. I'll talk about the strategy later on, but fundamentally this is kind of what's going on. So I've tried to boil it down to these 4 components needed to raise capital, whether that's for a charity or a nonprofit or a private venture or a social venture or all these different ways that you can raise capital now. You fundamentally need these 4 things. You need a project to fund, so what is needed, where is it going to go, what's it going to do. You need someone to provide the capital or make a donation or back the project. You need a way to collect those funds. How do we get it from the people giving in support of the project? But even if you have those 3 components, so you got a good project, people are willing to give it, and a way to collect, you need someone to put the 3 pieces together, and that's generally a fundraiser or an asker or someone who's driving the project. So again, this is nothing new, but I've highlighted the last 2 there because this is where the big shift in technology and demographic shift in terms of kind of 35-year-olds and under and millennials, but also just culturally. This is where crowdfunding is really on the rise. So the number 3 there is a way to collect. You can set up a fundraising page today in minutes for any charity you want in Canada through something like Chimp, or for any person or any project really through something, say, like Fundraiser. And it's cost effective, no startup costs, and just transaction costs ranging from 2.8 to some get as high as 9–10%. But as far as relative to cost of capital, it's extremely cheap, and the barriers to entry are so low. It's never been easier to actually go up and raise capital in terms of collection. And then someone to ask. I'll talk more about social influence, but one of the things that people are increasingly interested in doing is finding ways to support things and projects they care about without just writing a check. So it used to be, can I volunteer and stuff envelopes, and increasingly using social influence, whether it's in a fundraising capacity or advocacy, is a way that people can use that social influence and their networks for something they're passionate about. So when you look at demographic shifts and say millennials and this whole shift of what they care about, and then you throw in the fact that we have this technology and it's easier to ask and it's easier to collect, that's kind of why there's this huge rise on crowdfunding and peer-to-peer, and hopefully why you're on this webinar to learn a little bit more. And it allows something like this to happen. So don't worry, I'm not going to try to convince you to do something like Ice Bucket Challenge. I'm not even going to suggest that you do that. But something like this just is not possible without those last 2 components, the technology to collect and the desire and willingness of people to ask. So on the right, it shows this huge spike in donations, over 100 million in the end in the US and 60 million in Canada. And then on the left here, I hadn't actually seen this, but talking about the searches on Wikipedia looking around ALS. So one of the criticisms as well, it raised a bunch of money, but do people really know? And what that graphic is trying to say is there's actually ways to raise awareness and funds kind of at the same time through things like social influence and using those different factors. And so that's why crowdfunding is on the rise. It continues to grow. It's driven by the social sector, so social causes, not necessarily registered charities, but it could be nonprofits or social projects. There's over 550 platforms, at least in the world now, and estimates are around 15 billion in revenues worldwide by 2015 in terms of crowdfunding. So it's not really something going away. It's just part of a shift, and it's largely related to the technology we have and the desire of people to be more involved and support things they're passionate about. So that's kind of what crowdfunding is, or kind of how it works. And then this is where things get a little nerdy, some reasons on why it works. So I've tried to, again, boil this down to kind of 2 main reasons why I think crowdfunding works or can work. And one of them is tangibility and the other is social influence. So a huge reason why people don't give, if you look at donor surveys, or there's a book called The Life You Can Save, and it really looks at why people don't support projects. A common thread is a sense of futility. People don't know how their donation is making a difference. There's a lack of trust in terms of, how will it be used, and really, am I going to make an impact through my donation? So to combat futility, this sense of tangibility is key. And then on the other side, there's all kinds of social factors when it comes to giving. Right? Giving is not necessarily just a purchasing impact transaction. There's things that make us feel good. There's people in our network that ask. There's all kinds of social factors. So when you combine this real focus on tangibility and the addition of things like social influence, not just social media, I'm talking about social influence, I think it's what allows something like crowdfunding to work, and why, again, something like ALS Ice Bucket can even exist and take off like it did. So on tangibility, here's a few experiments in this great book. It's called The Science of Giving. It summarizes 14 chapters, basically of these really dense kind of PhD thesis style writing, and they try to condense it and make it more manageable. So I've summarized a few here, and this one is on tangibility. So they did a study where one organization's framed intangibly, no focus, geographically, no mention of how money used, no description of problem, just kind of, hey, we're a charity, we do good stuff, please support. Versus something that just started getting more at, this is where we're going to work, this is kind of how we're going to put your money to use, and here's the problem that we're trying to solve. And in that scenario, it shouldn't be too surprising, but donors gave 3 times more to the tangible charity than the non. A different form of that experiment, they took the same charity, in this case it was Oxfam, and sent a similar appeal, but they were just framed different. So one was very specific on how donation would be used, and the other one was more general. And so as it relates to this conversation, it's kind of a general fund appeal versus a project-specific appeal. And again, if you've been in the world of fundraising, you've seen this time and time and time again. But donors choose to support the project-based one and give almost twice as much. And it's not necessarily that one is better than the other. It's just donors can wrap their minds around a specific project as opposed to this kind of general vagueness of, trust us, we're doing good. So tangibility is kind of what donors want. A different form of tangibility, particularly in the realm of these types of campaigns, is a sense of a start and an end date, as well as a specific goal. So even if an organization framed their ask kind of generally, but as if you put in a start and an end date and just a goal amount, you would see a big increase in momentum in donations. And again, it's trying to combat this sense of, well, what's it going to do and how do I get involved? So when you throw in those parameters, it adds even more tangibility to the campaign. So this study was done on this thing called the goal proximity effect. And basically, as you get closer and closer to your goal, the donation rate increases kind of exponentially because people want to be a part of a success, and this starts getting into the social factors behind our giving. People want to be a part of a success. They want to see something succeed. They feel better when the goal will be reached. And so what's key here is you can raise $10,000 in a campaign, but if your goal is $20,000, that feels very, very different than raising $10,000 in a campaign where your goal is $9,000. Same amount of money raised, but hugely different feel for those involved. So we'll talk about goal setting and some of how you do it, but it ties into goal proximity and relates to tangibility. Social influence. So this is a study done by a firm up in DC called Wegner Instrom, and they surveyed and talked to a bunch of different people, kind of focused in on causes and said, why do you give, or what's the most valuable resource, and what do you share? So time and influence are growing. But on the bottom row there, I want you to focus on those first maybe 3 or 4. And if you read through those sentences, I'm proud to be affiliated. I want to influence others. It makes me feel like I'm having an impact. I want people to know that the cause or issue is important to me personally. Those are all very emotionally driven, personally driven statements. And then you kind of get down to the next row, and then it becomes a bit more, oh, the charity asked me. I don't have money to support the charity. I want to help the charity win. So again, it's this shift from inadequacy marketing, which is kind of, hey, we have a problem, we need help. If you don't help us, we'll die or people will suffer. That's kind of classic old school fundraising and old school marketing. And there's a shift to empowerment marketing, which is making it more about the donor, more about the consumer, and saying, what is it that you want to do and how do we help you along that way? And it's what people want to do, particularly with causes that are so emotional and personal. And then a different form of this is from the same study. It's just talking about how people find out about causes. And you look at the very bottom there, you'll see an organization or company's website. And the very first one is a friend or family member. Again, this has always been true in terms of word of mouth and how do you find out about things. It's from your network. It's just things like social media, things like email that allow for a scale and a frequency that we haven't been able to see before. So if you can tap into people's social influence and empower them, which we'll talk about strategy, it's a better way for people to know about your organization, and it's even more cost effective than spending buckets and buckets on things like ads and AdWords and Google Ads and all this kind of bought media type of stuff. So again, it's that shift from inadequacy marketing to empowerment marketing, and tapping into people's social influence. And it's not just about shares and web visits. There's practical donation value to social influence. So this is from that book again. This was with a public radio station, and they were doing calls. So in the control there, they would just call people and ask for a donation. And then they started citing a prior donation, saying, oh, you know, the person right before you gave $75. Would you like to give today? And then in another group, $150. Would you like to give today? And then another group, $300. And as you can see, the average donation grew and grew and grew to an average of 29%, and people talked about a $300 donation. There's a form of social influence called consensus, or it's part of this book from Robert Cialdini called Influence, and on kind of why humans do what we do. And consensus, or liking, or kind of anchoring to other people around us is usually valuable in driving up gifts and conversion rates. And that's what a lot of this is. If we take our giving and just put it in public, it's not on the shaming side. It's more like, oh man, they're giving that much, and well, I can give that much. So we anchor, and we're social beings, and so that's what happens in these campaigns, because they're public and a lot of donations can be seen and are shared. And in my opinion, that's a good thing for us all. So that's a little bit of the kind of science behind not just charity in general, but specifically kind of crowdfunding, peer-to-peer, social fundraising, because it taps into things like tangibility and social influence, goal proximity, all this kind of stuff. Okay, so that's kind of the basic. It's good fashion fundraising. It's technology enabled. It leverages tangibility and social influence. But how do you actually go about making it work for you? I used to have kind of 8 steps, and actually just this morning I changed it to kind of 4 phases. So we'll see how it goes. But I think there's more than 8 ways, or just one way to have a successful crowdfunding campaign. But these 4 phases you have to do. So you can do it slightly different ways, but these are the 4 things, and they are planning your campaign, running your campaign, ending your campaign, and closing your campaign. So planning. This is where actually a lot of the success or failure of a social fundraising or crowdfunding campaign exists. The temptation is to see those barriers to entry being so low, and the cost of capital potentially low, and just throw up a page and launch out there and just get it started. And while I like the idea of taking a risk and getting it started, that doesn't mean that you don't also need to plan for something like success. So these are kind of the 4-ish things that you need to do in this planning phase. First is choosing a good project and setting a goal. Again, tangibility is so key to what we're doing. So it's on the project side and the goal side. Developing your story and stories. So we'll talk a bit about the power of storytelling and why that's amplified in something like crowdfunding. Choosing a platform, I'll give you some tips. Ultimately, I don't think it's one of the most important things that you do, and I work for 2 platforms, and I'm saying that. And the last one is adding incentives and some things to be careful about. So the first is choosing that project and setting a goal. And here's, again, where that SMART goal setting, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound, is really important. So you can think about future projects is generally what crowdfunding is best. So oftentimes people ask, hey, should I crowdfund for my general fund? And you can, but it needs to be framed in a specific way. So you can talk, if, say, a general fund covers things like staff salaries or something like that, well, now you can try to talk more specifically about a person's staff salary, or what some of those costs are and how it's measurable, and then the goal setting, meaning, we need $30,000 over this month. Is that attainable or not? Relevant, this is why it's needed. If we don't have staff, we can't succeed. Time-bound, it's going to end at some point. But typically, projects are better about a future project or a new thing that you're trying to launch, or something that doesn't quite exist yet in the world. And that partly taps into the types of people that like funding these projects. Is they're more kind of investor type givers, where they want to see impact and see something new, as opposed to just to keep something old running. So you set up a project that's smart. Now you also need to kind of make the case for your organization. So if you're posting it on your own site or a third-party site, which we'll talk more about, people can see the project. That's great, but why should they trust you in the first place? Or why is this even important? And then why now? So the answer to why now is great, because it's typically the end of a campaign, or you have a specific end date, or you have some incentive. But why you is important. So this is where kind of linking off or having a really good short elevator pitch, not just your mission statement, because mission statements all end up very bland and sounding the same. But pitch your organization of why you're being trusted, link out so they can find out more. And then setting a goal. So setting a goal is a question I get asked all of the time. So I've already mentioned it's better to start low and go past your goal. So one way to set a goal is kind of, hey, what do you think you want to do, and then cut it in half and start there. Increasingly, we're getting some more data, however, in terms of how to set a goal. And so on the left here, classy.org, it's a great kind of social fundraising company, primarily in the States. They created this calculator, and so it's based on real-world data where you can plug in your Facebook fans, number of Twitters, all this kind of stuff, donors, and calculate. And their algorithm is basically based on 1% of that number can be turned into a peer fundraiser on your support or an advocate for you, and they'll raise about $265. So when you toss in all your numbers, it'll spit it out there at the bottom. So with those numbers, you can see that to say you have the potential to raise $5,300 and acquire 41 new supporters. From my experience, their algorithm is probably at the low end in terms of number of people that will get involved, the average funds raised, and donors acquired. But that's a good thing. So if that's kind of like the baseline, great. Another way to think about it is just anchoring compared to the averages. So this is you'll see on the right here, $88 per gift, $534 per page, and $9,000 per campaign. That's pretty close to what I've seen at Chimp and Peer Giving. So we've had over 2,000 fundraising pages and 300 and some kind of social fundraising campaigns. And our average fundraising page is about $500. Our average gift is about $72. And then our campaigns have some pretty wide variance. We've had a couple really big campaigns. But 500, 75, 10,000, those are kind of rough ballpark average numbers that if you have no idea where to start, you can try to think about it like that. So if you think you can get 5 fundraisers, $500 on average, boom, $2,500, that can be your first campaign. And going back to the project statement, this to me is kind of a magical statement that if you answer, it shapes up your project really, really well, and it's pretty concise. So what are you hoping to raise, by when, to impact who, and how? So I'll give you an example of how Charity Water, if you're not familiar, charitywater.org, it's an organization in the States that is kind of excelling at the social influence and crowdfunding strategy. But they do a campaign every September. It's called the September campaign. And for them, they would answer this question like this. They're trying to raise $2 million by the end of September to impact 100,000 people in the Sahel region of Africa by providing clean water. When I was at Charity Express, which was a digital agency, we ran a campaign for a medium-sized Canadian charity, and we used the same type of structure, and we were trying to raise $50,000 by the end of May to support 300 kids for education for a year. And you can take that same kind of model and break it down, say, for the donation. So in that last example, we broke it down for the donation. $150 given today provides education for one kid for a year. Or Charity Water, $450 today provides water for one family for a year. So this statement, what are you hoping to raise, by when, to impact who, and how? If that's all you can answer, then great. You kind of have a simple project structure and a goal to pursue. Developing story and your stories. I won't spend a lot of time. This could be its own total webinar, and there's layers and layers and layers upon storytelling. The big thing here is on the left there's a book called Contagious, and this author, Jonah Berger, talked about why do ideas and content spread. And on the right is this book, Made to Stick. It's a brilliant book talking a lot about communication. It says, why do we remember things, or why do things stick with us? And so you'll see emotion and stories are both components. So stories have the ability to stick, and stories have the ability to spread. And that's because it engages more of our brains. So if I just sat here and tried to tell you just stat after stat after stat, it'd be useful, but only one part of your brain would really light up and interact with what's going on. The part of the brain that kind of processes words and information and kind of files it away, and it's on. But if I can talk about more stories or use case studies or examples, what will happen is your brain will start activating in different ways. And so if I started talking about how beautiful it is outside, how I'm going to go for a run later, instantly your brain starts thinking about things like weather, experience of sun on your face, what it's like to run. And now different parts of your brain start triggering, releases oxytocin, and oxytocin is kind of the pleasure center. It's what locks in memories and makes things stick with us. So there's some scientific, physiological reasons why stories are actually more memorable and how we can retell stories years and years and years after, but facts and figures are really quick to forget. So in these campaigns, when we're focused on the spreading nature of fundraising and stories, having a core story that people can relate and retell is huge. And great stories follow this general narrative framework. So there's a site called Hash for Good, hashforgood.org, and they have some brilliant storytelling exercises and tips and worksheets, and it's really well done. And one of them is the narrative framework. I won't spend a lot of time on this again, but as you're setting out on your social fundraising or crowdfunding campaign, your story should follow this narrative framework. There is someone who has a problem. They are in need of a solution. They're trying to achieve a goal. There's a problem standing in their way. There's a solution that can overcome it. And in this case, people can either donate or fundraise to support that person. But the big key here in the narrative framework is you are not the hero of the story. So your organization is not the hero. So in the context of the narrative framework, it's not our organization needs and wants money. The problem is we don't have money. The solution is your money. The call to action is please give us money. It sounds terrible, but that's actually how a lot of our fundraising is structured. With whether we know it or not, we put our own organizations as the central hero to solve the problem in the story. But by having a shift or a focus on in particularly the supporter as the hero who can help overcome a problem to provide a solution to make a difference in the world through, say, fundraising or making a donation. It's a small shift, but it's a massive shift, again, as we're changing away from inadequacy marketing and more towards empowerment marketing. You are not the hero of the story. So in that narrative arc, there's really three of these kind of 5 main story types that are key. And one of them is the future story. It's what I've touched on before. This will not exist without kind of your intervention. So it can be the expansion of a new project, or you're going to a new country, or you're trying to reach a new population. It's somehow for people can alter the future. The beneficiary is the story where the beneficiary, the person who will receive the services, is the hero. What do they as a human want to achieve in their life? Is it get an education, provide for their kids? And what are the problems standing in the way? And then the solution is solved, and the call to action is fundraiser give. And then the donor supporter story. Again, this is something where they are the hero of the story, and Charity Water does better than anyone else, where they share the story of regular people, 10-year-old kids, 50-year-old women, 80-year-old men, all kinds of different people raising $10 to $100,000 just doing regular things. And again, it taps into that social influence of, oh, if they can do it, maybe I can do it as well. So those are some story types that you can go about telling in your crowdfunding campaign. Okay, so now choosing a platform. Like I said, this is probably one of the least important things in the planning, but I know it's a big question that comes up all the time. So here's kind of 5 questions to ask yourself. Do you need and want donor information? How much brand control? Do you want a tool that can access a pool of supporters? And so by that I mean something like, Indiegogo, Chimp, we have a bit of this, where they have users and they have people that go to their sites or get emails to find projects. You can potentially access that pool of supporters. Be careful, because it doesn't always happen, and if you're banking on that, you're probably in a lot of trouble. Whereas if you have your own tool, then you're really, really responsible for driving people to just use the tool on your own site. You won't be accessing another pool. Do you want to provide updates through this tool during and after the project? Some will offer updates and some don't. Increasingly they do. And how do you prefer to pay for the project? Is it upfront? Is it percentage-based? And increasingly, there's no upfront costs and just transactions. But there are some tools that you have to kind of buy and put some money in upfront, or have monthly or ongoing costs. So some of those questions are really related to, do you want this tool or platform to be yours, or do you just want to use theirs? And so generally, control versus cost, these two things are at odds. So if you want to issue your tax receipt and your brand and get all the donor information, that's yours, but it generally comes at a higher cost. If you kind of you don't mind it being issued by someone, tax receipt being issued by someone else, you may lose a little bit of donor information and you don't have as much brand control, then that's kind of theirs. but they're generally a lot cheaper and more cost effective to get started. So in Canada, we have some good ones. Canada Helps has just launched some new social fundraising stuff. Chimp, we have some, and then Fundraiser is another Canadian company that does this type of stuff. And then if it's yours, Artez is a classic one. They're owned by a U.S. company now. Peer Giving, we're in that space. Blackbot has some stuff. There's a bunch of products out there, but fundamentally the decision kind of needs to be, do you want it to be yours? Do you want it to be theirs? And the trade-offs between control and cost. And at the end of the day, try to choose the best platform for them. Again, they're the heroes. You're asking them to fundraise for you or even just give to your organization. It should be easy, simple, fun, delightful. But too often when we make technology decisions, it's kind of, well, how does this impact my life? And, I'm responsible for data or accounting, and it needs to fit in seamlessly. Otherwise, I have to do more work, which is real problems, I understand. But the challenge is that that's often at odds for what's best for people. So choose the best platform for them. All right, adding incentives. There's, on the for-profit side, crowdfunding campaigns often use things like perks. If you give $50, you can get a coupon to some store or, a gift card or something like that. I'm not a fan of perks at all in exchange of donations for charities. And partly there's a legal issue of advantage, but also I don't think we should be mixing the social decision of supporting someone or something that's meaningful to people and the economic decision of what do I get back tangibly in exchange. I think once we go down that route, it's very difficult for people to process, and then they evaluate campaigns and what's worthwhile in different ways. And I don't think we want to do that with philanthropy. So what I'm showing here, on the left, there was a recent study in Science Magazine where they were trying to find out this, they were really trying to find out this overhead aversion and how big of a deal is that. There's organizations, like Charity Water, that say 100% of donations go here, and they cover all their overhead through something else. So in the control, it was just no incentive. In the seed version, they would say something like, we've already raised $5,000 towards our goal, for example. Another version was a match, so anything you give today will be matched. And then in the other scenario, they said, basically, we've covered all the other expenses. 100% of your donations will go to this project. And you'll see the overhead appeal smokes the other ones. And it's kind of worrisome, and it says a lot, again, about our sector and this damaging concept of overhead not being a part of the causes and the work that we do. But what it gets at is, again, the human experience and feeling of futility versus tangibility. People feel that giving to organizations that have overhead, or that their donation will cover overhead, is making less of an impact. So these appeals are really effective because it's kind of making it more and more tangible for people to feel closer and closer to the impact they want to create. So that's a big discussion around whether you should go the 100% model or not. Happy to answer and give my opinion. But fundamentally, you'll see that adding any incentive, whether it's seed, match, or overhead, increases funds raised and donation amounts compared to doing nothing. And for us at Chimp, this is an analysis of all 2014 campaigns with and without matching. Twice as many people gave, and gift sizes were 41% bigger when matching was present. That doesn't include the matching dollars themselves. So what we've seen matching to be wildly effective, and probably one of the easier things that you can do to tack on to any social fundraising or crowdfunding campaign. It inspires donors, and it also makes the fundraiser feel like they're having twice the impact as well. So adding incentives that are not practical, tangible things like gift cards and T-shirts and stuff, we've seen to be very successful, and I strongly encourage it. Okay, so that's the planning phase. That's where the bulk of the work happens. We're going to start going a little bit quicker here to get to some questions, but also once you get planned and now you start running, not that the campaign gets easy, but there's a lot less legwork that you need to do. So setting up the campaign, recruiting supporters, launching with momentum, and supporting your supporters. So setting up the campaign, so you got your tool, just keep it simple. You've got your basic, how much you're going to raise, to impact who, by when statement. Hopefully you have like a video that can kind of talk about the project specifically, or maybe your organization, and you got a short bit about why people should care about you. But then link off. Don't spend time and energy trying to talk about, well, in 2014 we were recently, like, no one cares about that stuff, particularly when it comes to this project. If you think it's important, kind of link out, learn more about us, that kind of thing. Keep your campaign very simple. Videos and images, huge, right? Any kind of social sharing thing, videos and images get shared more. And the video one is key. There's a stat here on this slide talking about fundraisers with videos raised 2 times more than those without videos. And part of this is just, it makes it a lot easier for your supporters to tell your story. So stories are great to tell, that's awesome. And if you give them a great story, it's easier for them to retell it than kind of reciting your mission statement in facts and figures. But when you package it in a video, it's dead simple for them to pass on, and it's also, you know, it's embedded social. Click a few buttons, away it goes. So if you can tell that great narrative around your project or a beneficiary story in the context of a video, it can have a huge impact on what you're trying to do. And then add social and social tools. Things like a hashtag. It's useful for the engagement side. You can track hashtags online, know when people are giving and fundraising, and increasingly tools like ours and like Canada Helps, I think, and particularly the ones that are kind of yours that you buy, they have post-donation social share, so people can easily share the fact that they just, you know, created a fundraising page or made a donation to your campaign, and it allows you to speed up the frequency by which you can connect with them and say thanks. So kind of preceding that and having one is more of an engagement tactic than anything. So the other thing I want to point your attention to here, and it starts relating to kind of the recruitment of supporters, is that last quote there at the bottom. Nonprofits who raise the most money via crowdfunding understand that online fundraising does not succeed by itself. They're thoughtful about the outreach and marketing activities they need to do to have long-term success. They already have engaged supporters that care deeply. If you think that you're going to launch a campaign and, oh, people will just come after we build it, you're wrong. It just doesn't happen. It has the opportunity for that to happen, unlike ever before, but it happens doesn't happen very, very often. And if that's what you're planning on, it's going to be very difficult. So as you go and recruit supporters, who are those ones that kind of know and love you? And here's 4 suggested pockets. One is like the regular, loyal, monthly supporters, right? They've been around, they have a good connection with you. This is another way for them to contribute, or maybe you say, hey, instead of giving this year, what if you started a fundraiser? Volunteers and board members, like I said, it's a different form of volunteering, and we've seen some examples where crowdfunding has made it easier for board members to actually fundraise from their networks. So instead of it, you know, doing the face-to-face fundraising things or doing these kind of wine events, a lot of board members are finding it easier. Just, hey, I'll just create a page, ask my friends to give. Boom, I raised my, you know, minimum commitment for the year. Done. Plus, it's showing more energy and momentum in the public-facing way for others to get involved. Companies and corporate partners. Companies are getting more and more interested in not just that CSR story, but also fundraising or giving in more active ways. So companies and their staff potentially are an area of people that can get involved with kind of team pages and that kind of stuff. And then obviously younger supporters and followers. It's a bit of a stereotype, but it is true. They're more interested and willing to use technology and their social influence in support of a cause. But the premise being, you got to recruit supporters in a soft launch phase before you really go into full launch. And then supporting your supporters. Talked about this a lot. They're the heroes of the story. Making it easy on them by giving them videos and tools. So here's 2 examples of Charity Water again. And one of the things that makes Charity Water have so much success is their customer service. And I don't use stewardship or donor care. I really mean customer service. And I think that's going to be a trend that we'll see in the next 5 years. There's a shift more and more towards like really robust, good customer service in terms of how organizations think about, say, like donor stewardship. The kind of quick, prompt thanks and a 6-month report, it's increasingly, it's not good enough for people when they have all kinds of options in and out of the charitable space with, you know, they can search for questions, they can live chat with people, there's all kinds of tools and guides. So customer service and customer success is massive here. So some of the simple things you can do is just answer a couple questions you know they're going to have. How do I set up my page, or what tool do I have? A lot of third-party tools will have their own help sites that you can just point people to. And then things like guides, or how do you help spread the word? You know, Charity Water provides a campaign summary. That's kind of that, what are we trying to do here? What are we raising, for who, by when, how much, so that people can retell and know what's going on there. Staying in regular contact, you know, sending some emails, hey, way to go, keep going. One of the key stats I've seen is people who receive a donation within 3 days of setting up their fundraising page are twice as successful as those who don't. The idea being when someone's passionate and interested, yeah, I want to fundraise, if they go a few days without hearing from you or without seeing some success, there's a good chance that they'll just drop off and they'll be scared to fail. So if you can kind of fill in the gap and kind of in an automated way or a personal way, like, oh, awesome, saw you set up your page, great. We've even worked with some companies to seed donations. So right away, as soon as they create a page, a company makes a small donation and says, way to go. It's just ways to help support these supporters because they have fear of failure just like other fundraisers, except they're even more exposed because it's not their job. They're doing this in their free time for something they're passionate about. All right, ending. So in the goal proximity effect says that the best time to kind of ask people to give is right near the end. So what you're doing in the planning and the recruiting and the running is basically trying to create this environment where you can go up to people who are further away from you, people that are kind of on social, who've never heard of you, and ask them to give and help close out the campaign. So you can say, hey, we're $5,000 away, $100 away, show that thermometer bar going up, and send out your own emails and ask people to give and encourage your fundraisers to also push that out to help finish strong. It's a really, really right time, and you'll often see that the graph on these types of campaigns is kind of like a hockey stick. It kind of starts, grows and grows and grows, and then it gets exponentially increased at the end. And then closing. This is something that just as a sector we're pretty terrible at in terms of donor retention, and a lot of it comes from not just the thanking but increasingly the kind of reporting back. So these are some donor retention stats. I'm sure you're familiar. It's not good. And so focusing on and having closing as a thought before you enter into the campaign is key. So hopefully you're thanking people as you go, or it's automated as soon as they make a donation and you have systems set up. But definitely at the end to say thank you to everyone who's given. Acknowledge the fact that they've given is huge. And then one thing that often gets lost is treating fundraisers more like major donors. So maybe they didn't contribute, you know, $1,000, $10,000, $100,000, whatever your major gift level is, but they gave up their time and they used their networks and influence for you, which is a huge ask. So instead of treating them just like a normal donor, try to think of them more like kind of major donors in terms of how you're treating them. Customized thank yous, and the lifetime value is one of the metrics that good fundraising programs are built on. But lifetime value for fundraisers is huge. So the average fundraiser raises $500. And if they do that every year or every other year, think of the lifetime value of retaining that fundraiser. So oftentimes a fundraiser, it's not even about the donors that they do or do not acquire, and those retention rates are pretty low. It's about retaining and more deeply engaging the fundraiser themselves. So definitely provide the final results of the campaign. Great, we reached our $10,000 goal, you know, thank you so much. But if you can frame it in ways that are meaningful to supporters, you know, $10,000 doesn't mean that much to the supporter. It means a lot to you, but what does it mean to them? It means that you can purchase that, you know, building, provide education for another year, provide clean water. So frame the results in meaningful ways to them. And then close the loop. I think this is a key point. So today, all that other stuff is kind of just good, basic kind of donor stewardship stuff. And what closing the loop is really more about is if you said you were going to, say, build a school or provide education for a kid, well, increasingly, you better be dang sure that you follow back up with those people and show the building that you've built. Tell the story of a kid that provided education. Whatever that project is creates this great opportunity to build trust and close the loop by saying, hey, we said we would do this. 6 months later, this is what we're doing or where we're at. So this is an example of a charity water email again from when I raised $500 for them through this project. And this came back, and you'll see a lot of the yous and yours. They're making it about me. They had a short kind of iPhone video of a particular project that I was funding. They reminded me of what the campaign was about in the first place and showed me on the timeline where things were at. They didn't wait until it was all over to say, this is what was going on. And then they asked for feedback. It was just a brilliant kind of a recap email that came out about 9 months or so after my fundraiser was complete. So closing the loop is paramount to retaining donors, but more importantly, retaining fundraisers and earning the trust of the people that have participated in the campaign. So those are the 4 kind of basic phases. Really went through quick near the end. Some of the resources I used and mentioned, Made to Stick, the book on communications and why things stick. Science of Giving is a really dense, nerdy one. Charitywater.org, classy.org has great guides, and their blog is fantastic for this type of stuff. And Hatch for Good and the storytelling is fantastic. There's another book called Winning the Story Wars. That concept of you are not the hero of the story and empowerment marketing really comes from that book by a guy named Jonas Sachs. And I think it's a great read for fundraisers and marketers, just thinking about that shift to how things used to be done to how things are going to be done today and in the future. That's a glimpse at kind of peer giving and what our product is. That's a glimpse of Chimp. And thank you very much for listening. That's my email, brady@chimp.net. Feel free to email me, and then on Twitter and my blog, Recharity, and then Peer Giving and Chimp if you want to find out more about our products. So I think we have some time for questions.
Yes, so thank you, Brady, for your informative presentation. I'd like to take this time to ask a few questions from our audience. So if you have not yet entered your questions for Brady, please do so by using the questions chat box in your GoToWebinar panel. Okay, so our first question is from Anthony. He mentioned that he read an interview with Dave Toyson, the now retired CEO of World Vision Canada. It was said that although social media has certainly allowed the building for awareness and the sharing of stories, it has changed the attitude and practice of givers. So they've noticed that people, especially younger demographics, will click like or share on social media and think that they've done their part or are giving towards the organization rather than giving money. Have you noticed the same trend, and how does that change how we need to do things as a charity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, one of the things that it taps into is this term called slacktivism. There was a study by some UBC researchers, I think it was about 2 years ago, that actually tried to scientifically prove that when people like or wear a pin, like for Daffodil Month or something like that, they're less likely to give, and that's actually what they found out. So for me, that's always an issue, right? There's people, when people get involved with the cause, what we give them is basically a good feeling back. And so when we ask people to just wear a pin or just like a post or just share this with friends and equate it to substantially making a difference in the cause, that's bad. That's bad in my opinion. That's negative, because we're giving people a good feeling of getting involved without them really making a meaningful impact in our work. So you can still, ask people to like and wear pins. That's great, but don't position it in a way that confuses it with a meaningful action that's actually leading to impact. So I think a solution to that is actually something more like social fundraising causes, because right now the gap we have is, great, you can kind of like and read information all the way to commit to be a monthly giver or give up your money. And so I think crowdfunding or something like it that is more meaningful, some advocacy campaigns where it's really, hey, recruit 10 people is a different form of this, but we need to find ways that move people along the continuum. So if it stops at a like, or there's this huge gap between like a post and give us $20 a month, then I think we'll find that where people like and they aren't committed enough to cross that chasm, so to speak, to make a bigger commitment. And things like how they can use social influence can help bridge that gap a bit. So it's an issue, and that's the biggest thing, is don't confuse and don't communicate those things as being hugely important to your organization. And for a like, every dollar goes here, and I'm not a big fan of those things personally.
Okay, great. So our next question is from Nathan, and he asks, is staff always considered to be overhead?
Yes, typically. So how accounting works is you kind of estimate how much staff salary is attributed to things like fundraising and programs. But fundraising is also considered overhead. So unless someone is 100% programs, then at least part of their salary will be attributed to administration and fundraising, which is considered overhead. So again, that's more of like an accounting answer, and it's unfortunate that our definition of impact in the sector is driven by accounting and numbers. I just think it's incredibly damaging, and it's one of the worst things going on in the sector. So I wish it wasn't so. I think staff and investing in staff is one of the most important things for organizations. So that's the story we should be telling, is kind of the value of staff, as opposed to just, we spend 90% on programs. That doesn't mean anything. It's not accurate. It says nothing about impact or quality.
Okay, great. We have another question from Veronica. For nonprofits that are not charities and therefore cannot issue official tax receipts to donors, is it possible to work with a group like Chimp and have Chimp issue receipts to donors?
Yeah, it is. So in that case, you would need an agency agreement or something with a registered charity. So tools like Canada Helps and Chimp have their own foundations that issue the tax receipt, and then at law, those donations or those funds can only be given to qualified donees. So registered charities, public foundations, RCAA sporting organizations, and some municipalities, and then some exceptions. So you could partner with a charity that's doing similar work. So you as a nonprofit, as long as you can carry out that charity's purposes and they're fine to let money flow through them and have you kind of execute that way, then you can. But there's also tools like Fundraiser where you can be a nonprofit and they don't require you to do that. Our peer giving product doesn't require you to be a charity. You can have a nonprofit and a charity. So there are some tools out there that just allow you to get money yourself through bank accounts and PayPal without issuing tax receipts. But the tax receipt can be an issue for people. So in that case, if you think it's really important, then finding a partnership or an agency agreement with a registered charity would be how you would do it.
We also have a question from David. He wanted to know if you could say a bit more about the relationship between online fundraising and traditional methods, as in how to integrate these channels.
Yeah, great question. So integrated fundraising smokes single channel fundraising, whether it's online or offline. So there's all kinds of research out there from, Blackbaud and Target or, any kind of consulting firm. That's fairly universal now. It's if you only go online or you only go offline, it's not as successful as having an online and offline component. So one of the things I think is powerful on the social fundraising side is to actually integrate with the offline. So not as much on terms of like recruiting supporters. You wouldn't maybe want to mail someone and say, hey, do you want to be a fundraiser? If so, tell us. And then, like the sign-up flow is just really difficult. But particularly at the end of that campaign, so you set a $10,000 goal, you've done the hard work of creating the story and making the ask, and now you're at 80% of your goal. Planning to do kind of an appeal to maybe lapsed donors or double lapsed or people that just haven't given in a while, or just everyone on your list if it's a focused campaign. I think that's a good time to actually tell people to give, and you can point them to either your own website or the crowdfunding page, whichever way you do, because it's a really right giving opportunity. So I think there's some definite strategic use cases for having kind of an offline direct mail strategy integrate with an online fundraising campaign. There's also a lot of the fundraising stuff is offline events, and the online fundraising page is just that method of collection, in those 4 components. So come over for dinner, or I'm going for a swim, or I'm having a bake sale, and instead of it just, we've been doing those things forever, and instead of dealing in checks and cash, and it's, who carries cash and all this stuff, people can give online before, during, or after. But the actual event or the person they're supporting, that activity can still happen offline for sure, and in often cases we encourage that.
Okay, we also have a question from Deborah, and she wanted to know what is the challenge of raising funds for ongoing programming versus projects?
I mean, that's always a challenge for people, again, just kind of ongoing. It doesn't have that definitive sense of, what is this doing or how I'm making an impact. And so that's always a problem. Typically, what you should do is you should raise those kind of funds ongoing through things like major gifts, people who really know who you are. Technical funders should be doing more of that, funding the organization and what they need to grow, so that you can, craft more of the future story or the more appealing story to kind of average people like me who will get more involved. Because appealing to me to support you in an ongoing way is really, really difficult, because now I need to trust the whole organization and what exactly you're doing and how long you've been around. And whereas if it's just this really, really cool, tangible project, I don't need to know and care as much about all of your organization. I can just kind of give to the project. So that's another trend, is people are generally giving to more and more organizations in smaller amounts, because they're looking for these kind of high-impact project-based situations, as opposed to, hey, I'm going to lock in with this one organization and devote 80% of my giving to them. So ongoing versus project has always been a challenge. I just think that projects work better in the crowdfunding world.
Okay, great. I want to thank you again, Brady, for helping us out and learning more about crowdfunding. And I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time out of your lunch to join us. Just a reminder that the webinar recording, presentation slides, and recap will be posted on our website next week, and we will email you once all the resources are available online. Please also fill out the brief post-webinar survey that will launch after this session. There's an option to sign up for Brady's newsletter or learn more about Chimp and Peer Giving, and you can answer any unanswered questions via email. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.